I've always believed that the stage is where I truly come alive, where the weight of my daily roles fades away, and I step into someone brighter, more fearless. It's funny, really. In a place built on illusion, I discovered something real about myself. My name's Rachel. I'm 38. A wife, technically, a mother, and a performer. Not the pirouette on a spotlight kind, but the kind who sways through velvet shadows and dim lights on a platform where the elite come to forget who they are. I dance in a world of hush and heat, where glances mean more than words. And yes, I dance for them. But mostly I dance for me. My husband hates it. The atmosphere, the work, the idea that I bring in more than he ever could. He scoffs and calls it fake. Says it makes him feel small. What he's never realized, never tried to, is that dancing rescued me long before he showed up in my life. It gave me an identity when everything else tried to strip it away. This isn't just work. It's me. These days, our marriage is more of a blueprint than a relationship. A shared space, a last name, a child. But not much else. The silence between us hangs heavy. Meals are lukewarm, conversations are half-spoken, and his touch, when it comes, feels mechanical. When it doesn't, it feels like a wall. Then there's Noah. My son. He just turned 18, and when I look at him now, I still see the kid with scraped knees, but I also see the man emerging in his place. He's got height, presence, so much like his dad in form, but more like me in spirit. His room pulses with music. Most evenings, bass-heavy tracks shake the walls, and I smile because I know that rhythm. It lives in him. I see it in the way he studies dance videos online, mimics moves when he thinks no one's watching. That's mine. That came from me. He's always known I'm a dancer. But we've never discussed the specifics. Not really. I suspect he doesn't want to know more than he already does. Or maybe he does, and is just waiting for the right time to ask. I hope that moment never comes. Because how would I begin? How could I explain the heels, the silk, the way I own a room full of men who wouldn't even glance my way in daylight? How do I make him understand that I feel more like myself in spotlight than I do within these walls? One night, I came home earlier than expected, something that rarely happens. He was in the living room, headphones on, nodding to his own beat. When he noticed me, he looked up with a flicker of surprise. We just stared for a breath. Me in my smoky eyeliner and leather, still half-dressed in remnants of the stage. Him in his sweatshirt, his gaze quietly searching. "You're early," he said. "Yeah," I nodded, slipping out of my coat. "Slow night." He watched me longer than usual. Was it a performance night? I hesitated. Isn't it always? His eyes lingered. I couldn't read them. Maybe worry. Maybe just curiosity. But he didn't push, and I silently thanked him. I wasn't ready for truth. Not all of it. Later, from the hallway, I watched as he moved to his music, every limb sinking to an inner beat. His posture, the stretch, the rhythm, it was raw art. And in that moment, my heart ached. With pride. And something else. A nostalgia for when everything between us felt uncomplicated. I wonder if he realizes how much of me he carries. I wonder if he senses how close I am to unraveling. Some nights, when the house is still and the darkness wraps around like a second skin, I picture telling him everything. About the club, about my hidden dreams, about the parts of myself I had to tuck away to survive. I imagine him listening, not judging, just hearing me out. Maybe that day will come. Until then, I keep dancing. For strangers. For the woman I used to be. And maybe, without knowing it, for him. The following night, I came home even later than usual. The kind of night where the air at the club felt alive, charged. The crowd buzzed with something electric. One of our VIPs, a man with a politician's grin and shadows behind his eyes, had requested a solo performance. It wasn't a conversation, but a performance where meaning flowed through movement. A turn of the shoulder, a slide of the foot, a glance that spoke volumes. As I left, his words clung to me like his cologne. "You disappear like smoke, but they'll never forget the heat you leave behind." He was right. I vanished there. But that's where I feel most alive. But as I stepped into my softly lit kitchen, reality came rushing back in. The familiar aroma of reheated food hung in the air. Someone had warmed up dinner. My heels tapped quietly on the floor as I walked down the hallway. At the far end stood Noah. He was in front of the fridge, shirtless, sipping orange juice right from the carton like he used to when he was a kid. The cool glow from the refrigerator bathed his toned shoulders in soft gold. He turned at the sound of my steps. "Hey," he said, voice husky and quiet. I gave a small smile, setting my purse down near the wall.
"Hey.
Couldn't sleep?" He shook his head slightly as he returned the carton. "Just too much on my mind." I knew exactly what he meant. I settled onto the couch, resting my head back with my eyes closed. I heard his footsteps behind me, then the cushion shifted as he dropped beside me. There was a brief silence. "You look wiped out," he murmured. "Rough night." "Not rough. Just heavy," I said, opening my eyes to meet his. There was something unspoken in his gaze, some quiet question he hadn't yet found the words for. "Are you ever going to tell me what it's really like?" he asked. His tone wasn't accusing, just open. I let out a long breath. It's not exactly dinner conversation, you know? I'm not a kid anymore. That made me glance his way. He wasn't wrong. He leaned back, folding his arms behind his head and staring upward. "I see it. The way you come home. Like you've just left another universe. It's in your face." I paused. I didn't realize it was that obvious. He gave a tiny, knowing grin. "I pay attention. Isn't that what dancers do?" I turned slightly, watching the side of his face. "You really are like me." His eyes met mine. "I always have been." The quiet between us grew thicker, gentle, but full of all the truths we hadn't said out loud. I could almost feel his pulse still buzzing with rhythm, and mine still humming with echoes of the night. Two souls molded by motion, side by side beneath the same roof. "You know," he said after a moment, "I used to think it was strange that you danced for strangers, that men paid to watch." I tensed, unsure of what was coming. But now, I think it's kind of powerful. You walk in and the whole place shifts. You make people feel something. That's not nothing. I stared at him, feeling something warm begin to rise in my chest. "You don't think it's degrading?" He turned toward me. "Do you?" "No," I said, my voice barely audible. "Never." "Then why would I?" I didn't have an answer to that. Outside, wind swept against the windows, like the world pressing its nose against the glass, reminding us it was still there. Noah stood and stretched, his limbs loose. "I've been working on a piece," he said. "Some new choreography. Wanna see?" I couldn't help but smile, even though my legs ached. "Right now?" He nodded.
"Sure.
"Why not?" He led me to the living room, pushed aside the coffee table, and cued a track. It throbbed with raw energy, slow but intense. And then he moved, sharp and smooth all at once, each motion pulsing with intention. I couldn't take my eyes off him. He finished with a breathless turn, his chest rising and falling. "Well," my throat tightened. "You're a natural." He beamed, flushed and pleased. "I learned from the best." Something stirred in me, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the first soft break between two versions of myself, the performer and the parent. Or maybe it was something new entirely. "Your turn," Noah said, stepping aside with a glint in his eyes. He wiped his brow with his shirt, then folded his arms and leaned against the wall. I laughed, shaking my head. "No way. That was your stage tonight. I'm just here to cheer." He gave me a look. "Didn't you just say I got it from you?" "Show me." I hesitated, heart picking up pace. Dancing for a room full of strangers? I could do that in my sleep. But here, in our quiet house, with my son's eyes locked on mine, waiting, that felt different. "You're serious?" I asked. He nodded, more thoughtful now. "I want to see you." His words struck a chord I wasn't ready for. I closed my eyes, drew a breath, and let instinct take over. The music played on, slow, rhythmic, moody. I stepped forward, lifted my arms, and let my body fall into movement. It came naturally. My limbs remembered even when my thoughts hesitated. I danced, not to impress, not to perform, but to release. I held back just enough, smoothing the edges into something graceful. When I turned back toward him, I caught the expression on his face. His jaw slack, and a faint, unmistakable blush. A subtle flush crept up from his neck, brushing across his cheeks. It wasn't the simple wonder of a son seeing his mom do something impressive. It was more layered than that. Like he was trying to process a version of me he hadn't expected to meet. I dropped my arms to my sides, suddenly self-aware. Noah. He blinked, then looked away quickly.
Sorry. That was just, wow.
You're unreal. My cheeks warmed. I'm still the same person, you know. I know, he said quickly. I wasn't ready for that. You move like it's not my first time? I offered with a half smile. He chuckled softly, a little breathless. Exactly. After that, we both sat down. The silence wasn't awkward, but it carried weight. He was looking at me with new eyes, not uncomfortable, but more aware. Like he'd glimpsed something beyond the surface. I tucked my hair behind my ear. You all right? He nodded, but didn't look at me. Just thinking. About what? He hesitated. Then he said, It's strange. I always knew you were strong, but I didn't realize how much you hide it. That stilled me. He continued, gentler now. You turn it down, around Dad, around me, around everyone. But when you dance, it's like you're somewhere else. Untouchable. My throat tightened. I guess I never really pictured you having a whole life I wasn't part of, he admitted. And seeing it now, it's a lot. I reached over, resting my hand on his. It's not that I wanted to keep you out, Noah. I just needed something that belonged to me. He nodded, finally lifting his gaze.
Yeah.
I get that. We sat there in the quiet for a while. Then, almost in a whisper, he said, Maybe that's why it's hard to stop watching. The air seemed to freeze. We didn't speak after that. Just sat side by side, watching the dim blue of the TV reflect across the walls, neither of us sure how to navigate the change that had crept between us. But something had undeniably shifted, and neither of us reached for the old version of things. The following days had a quieter energy to them. Noah didn't revisit the topic, but I felt the difference in his eyes, more curious, more attuned. And not just in the way he watched me, but in how I looked back. It was a mellow Thursday evening when he finally asked. We were in the kitchen, the subtle sweetness of tea mingling with the lo-fi music playing from his phone. He stirred his drink slowly, then glanced at me without lifting his head. What's it called? Where you perform? I froze mid-sip, his question landing softly, but with the weight of something bigger. I didn't rush to respond. I just watched him, the way he kept his tone light, his eyes fixed on his tea, his posture unusually still. It doesn't really have a name, I said. It's private. Invitation only. He looked up. So it's kind of exclusive. I nodded.
Yeah.
That's one word for it. I hoped the label would be enough, a kind of soft boundary. But I saw the flicker in his eyes. He was already past the gate. Do you ever think about letting someone see it? Someone outside that world. I set my cup down slowly, my pulse ticking up. It's not that kind of environment, Noah. His brow pulled together. But people go there with guests, right? Like friends. Or others? I hesitated. Sometimes. But only people who understand what they're walking into. And what are they walking into? His voice was calm, almost too quiet. He wasn't just asking about the venue. He wanted into the part of me I'd kept hidden, even from him. It's a space where people stop being who they're the rest of the day, I answered. And I get to do the same. He nodded slowly. So, it's not just about the dancing. No, I said honestly. It's about expression.
Escape. For them.
And for me. He didn't press further. But I saw it in his eyes. That spark of wanting to understand. Wanting to witness. My chest tightened with a mix of fear and something that felt dangerously close to hope. Then, just like that, the tension was broken. Later that week, a storm rolled in. Wind pushed against the windows, and rain patterned the glass with delicate percussion. We were all home, the three of us. I'd just returned from the club. My hair was still pinned, the faint shimmer on my collarbone catching the low light. I hadn't changed yet. My husband looked up from the couch as I passed through the room. His eyes narrowed. "You're proud of yourself?" he said suddenly, his voice sharp. "Wearing that? Parading around like—" "Don't," I warned, my tone icy. But he wasn't done. "You're supposed to be a mother, not some fantasy in heels. How long do you plan on living in this little delusion before you finally wake up?" His voice sliced the room in two. I opened my mouth to reply, to defend myself, but before I could speak, Noah stood. His jaw was set, his expression unyielding. His eyes held a darkness I hadn't seen before. "Say that again," Noah said, his voice low and sharp, edged with something that made my breath hitch. My husband let out a dry, bitter laugh. "What, you think this is okay? You're seriously going to defend this?" "I think she deserves respect," Noah snapped back, his voice tight with fury. "Which is more than you've ever given her." He stepped closer, his hands balled at his sides. The tension in him was palpable, raw, brimming. This wasn't the boy who used to joke during dance videos or raid the pantry in the middle of the night. This was someone else entirely.
A man.
My husband barked out something else, but his voice was overtaken by Noah's intensity. And for one charged second, I thought he might actually lose control. "Stop," I said, moving between them. I could feel the heat rolling off him, the tight rhythm of his breathing. My hand found his arm, and when he looked down at me, some of the fire in his eyes dimmed. Just a little. Without another word, my husband turned, yanked his coat from the hook, and slammed the front door behind him. Silence swept in like a tide.
Heavy. Wide.
Final. I turned to face Noah. He was still shaking slightly, his skin flushed from adrenaline. "You didn't have to," I whispered, though inside I wanted to cling to him, thank him 1,000 times over. "I did," he replied simply, "because he doesn't see you. But I do." My throat constricted. My hand remained on his arm, his warmth grounding me. For a long second, I couldn't tell which one of us was holding the other up. What I knew was this: the line between us, the one drawn years ago, was no longer where it had been, and neither of us seemed eager to redraw it. When he pulled me into his arms that night, wrapping me tight, and whispered softly at my ear, "You're safe with me always," something inside me gave way. The words were quiet, but the intent behind them rang deep. Not a flirtation. Not a script.
A vow.
I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark, hearing his voice on repeat, feeling the echo of his arms, and the weight of everything else. The distance from my husband, the questions I hadn't yet asked myself, and the look Noah had given me earlier. Not like a son admiring a parent, but like a man discovering something sacred. The next night, I stepped into my second life again. The club was full, pulsing with people, energy thick in the air. Powerful faces lined the tables. Famous ones, rich ones, dangerous ones. I recognized some. I ignored most. But during the final set, something shifted. I saw him. At the back, partly in shadow. All in black, fitted shirt, dark slacks, no tie. He stood out without trying.
Still. Poised.
Eyes locked on me.
Noah.
He didn't smile. Didn't nod. Just stood there, watching. And in his gaze, I saw something that stopped my breath.
Pride. Silent.
Intense. Undeniable. He wasn't disgusted. He wasn't embarrassed.
He was honoring me.
The way his eyes lit, the slight arch of his brow, it was as if he saw every part of me and loved me more for it. When the lights faded, I nearly forgot to bow. Later, I found him waiting outside, leaning casually against the brick wall in the courtyard, as if he belonged there, as if he'd always been part of this world. He stepped toward me, lifted my hand, and pressed it to his lips. "I'm stunned," he said quietly, voice like silk. "He'll regret every word he's ever spoken to you. And now I get it. Why you come here. It's not just about dancing. It's about being seen." He looked at me, not just at my features, but through them, as if he could read everything beneath. And in that look, I felt warmth bloom in my chest. Not from approval, but from being understood. I couldn't speak. My throat was too tight, my heart hammering. He smiled faintly. "You'll get a surprise in a week." I blinked. "A surprise?" He leaned closer. "You forgot? It's your birthday." I laughed softly, stunned and moved. "You remembered?" "I remember everything," he said.
And he did.
Because when that day came, it wasn't just roses or a handwritten note. He drove me to an unfamiliar part of the city, into a building that seemed forgotten by time. But inside, up a narrow flight of stairs, was something astonishing. The space had been transformed. Spotlights shimmered from each corner. Soft drapes hung elegantly from the walls. A sleek, polished stage stood in the middle, beneath a gentle golden light. A pole, carefully installed. Speakers waiting. And as I stepped in, my music began to play, as if the room had been waiting too. It was a replica of the club, but private. Just for me. I turned slowly, breath caught, eyes wide. Every detail was exact. Every corner perfect. He had recreated my sanctuary and gifted it back to me. I faced him, overwhelmed. "Noah." He held out his hand. I took it, and the moment I did, I knew this wasn't just a birthday gift. It was permission. An invitation.
To be me.
Fully. Unapologetically. And I said yes. Without words. I said yes. I stepped toward the platform, the music swelling around me like a wave. I let my eyes close and gave in to the movement. Not for strangers, not for applause, not for escape, but for him. For the young man who had once been just a boy, who saw parts of me I thought were lost, who remembered the version of me I'd hidden away. Each roll of my hips, every stretch of my arms, it all became expression. A thank you, a confession, a quiet surrender. When I opened my eyes at the end, he hadn't looked away. His gaze held no judgment, no confusion, no desire. Only wonder. And in that quiet moment, beneath a halo of imagined lights, the truth became clear. He hadn't just created this room. He had opened something much deeper. A door we never expected. A threshold we couldn't unstep. As the last note faded and stillness reclaimed the room, I remained on the stage, breath catching in my chest. The only sound was the low hum of the lights above and the echo of something unspoken beating between us. Noah walked forward. He didn't rush.
He didn't speak.
Just moved slowly across the wooden floor, each step pressing heavier into the air between us. I didn't move. I was still in the light, still caught between who I was a moment ago and who I was now. And then he was there, standing in front of me, close enough to feel the warmth of him, too close to pretend nothing had changed. His hands stayed by his sides, hesitant, but his eyes, they carried something vulnerable, something unshakably sincere. "You don't know," he said quietly, voice roughened by feeling, "how long I've wanted to give you this. A space that was only yours, where no one could reduce you." I couldn't speak. "Everyone takes from you," he added. "Always has. But no one just watches. Just sees you." My throat tightened. "And you?" I wanted to give something back. His words hung there, full and trembling. Then, without fanfare, he lifted a hand and brushed a loose strand of hair away from my face. It wasn't part of any script. It wasn't planned. It was real. "I've never seen anything more beautiful," he whispered. My breath caught. My lips parted, but I couldn't form a reply. That's when it happened. He leaned forward, not boldly, but with hesitation, like he was offering me a choice. I could have stopped him, but I didn't. My chest was already fluttering, my breath shallow, and the moment had already claimed me. I let my eyes fall shut. And then he kissed me. Gentle.
Searching.
Full of reverence. It wasn't fast. It wasn't desperate. It asked a question. It gave an answer. It carried every silent feeling that had grown between us, quietly and carefully, for years. It was the kiss of someone who had waited, not for the chance, but for the moment to feel right. When we pulled away, there were no words left to say. There didn't need to be, because that kiss had already spoken the truth. That a boundary had been crossed. That returning to before was no longer possible. And that somehow, despite everything, this, right here, was the only place we had ever truly belonged.